Today we'll be taking a look at the classic legend from Sleepy Hollow and asking ourselves a simple question. Was there a real Headless Horseman? The answer might just make you lose your head. The legend of the Headless Horseman became popular thanks to Washington Irving's books, where he told the story of Ichabod Crane and a Hessian soldier, and it pretty much resurfaces every year around Halloween. The story is about a soldier who had his head blown off by a cannonball during the American Revolution, and after that, he became as a ghost to haunt the area around a Dutch village called Sleepy Hollow. Since the story came out in 1820, the Headless Horseman has shown up in many movies and TV shows. But is this just a made-up story? If it is, then it is well known all around the world and has been a recurring theme in human storytelling. Here are some instances of the legend resurfacing through history. Washington Irving wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow while he was in Europe. He got his inspiration from German and Irish folk stories about Headless Horsemen. One tale that influenced him was about Saint Denis from France, where the saint picked up his own head after being executed. And the same story arises in Germany with Der Kopflose Reiter, in Ireland, where the Headless Horseman was called the Dullahan, and the same with Scotland and Wales, where it's actually a woman called Venib Hebben. In pretty much all of these versions, seeing this ghost was a sign that death was near. This story was also collected by the Grimm brothers, who added it to their tales. In this version of the story, the Grimm said that anyone who commits terrible crimes and gets beheaded for them will have to spend their afterlife without a head. In another version of the fairy tale called Hans Jagenteufel, a woman is picking acorns near a part of the forest called Lost Waters when she hears a hunting horn and then a loud thump. A shadow falls over her, and when she looks up, she sees a rider on a gray horse wearing a gray cloak. She ignores him and just keeps collecting acorns. The next day, the woman goes back to the forest for more acorns. Just like before, the rider appears again, but this time he's holding his head under his arm. Scared, the woman asks who he is. His severed head speaks and says his name is Hans Jagenteufel, a man who drank too much and stole things in life. As punishment for his bad behavior, he's cursed to wander forever. And I think the clear moral of the story here is don't steal, or maybe don't drink too much, perhaps both in combination. The horseman also appears in a 14th century poem called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The story is about a brave knight, Sir Gawain, who takes part in a strange challenge with the Green Knight. The deal is that if Sir Gawain cuts off the Green Knight's head, the Green Knight will return the favor in a year and a day. Thinking no one can survive without a head, Sir Gawain agrees and chops it off. But to his surprise, the Green Knight picks up his head from the ground and leaves, waiting for the time when he'll come back for revenge. There have been sightings of Headless Horsemen all over the world, but many of them come from the United Kingdom. One of the most famous sightings happened at Agincourt Estate in Bristol. On clear nights, when the moon lights up the grand mansion and its grounds, some people have claimed to see a Headless Horseman slowly riding around the estate, as if he's searching for something. I wonder what. Others say they've seen a pack of scary hellhounds beside him. When workers were fixing up the mansion, which is from the 11th century, they said that their tools were being scattered around in the morning, even though they left everything neatly organized the day before. It's said that the headless ghost of Agincourt Estate was once a servant. He was ordered by the estate's owner to hide and protect a large treasure on the grounds before the Civil War of 1642. Sadly, both the servant and his master died before the war ended, so the treasure never had to be protected. But the loyal servant came back as a ghost after his death to watch over the treasure, which is still lost to this day. Blickling Hall, one of the biggest estates in Norfolk, has a history going back to the 1400s. The mansion that stands there now was built in 1611, on the ruins of the older building. Some say the original house was where Anne Boleyn was born before she moved to Hever Castle in Kent, where she spent a lot of time with King Henry VIII. Even though the original building is mostly gone, some of its walls were used when they built the new mansion. Anne Boleyn was famously beheaded by her cruel husband King Henry after he became frustrated that she didn't provide him with a son. He also had her brother George executed, accusing him of having an inappropriate relationship with his sister and of cheating. Completely made up charges so Henry could marry his next wife. After Anne's execution, her body was wrapped in a wax-coat shroud with her head placed under her arm because the makeshift coffin they used was too short for her. Since her unfair and brutal death, people say her headless ghost returns to Blakeney Hall every year on May 19th, the day she died. As night falls and the sound of owls echoes through the swaying trees of the estate, several people have reported seeing a ghostly carriage pulled by 4 horses, driven by a headless horseman and making its way up the driveway. Inside the carriage, Anne Boleyn is said to be sitting with her head resting on her lap. Witnesses say the spirit vanishes just as the carriage reaches the mansion. After that, Anne has been seen entering the house, wearing either a white or gray dress. She is said to wander the hallways of the grand building until sunrise. Our next occurrence comes from Butterton in the Staffordshire Peak District. It's about a farmer who sold 4 cows at the Mayfair in early 1700s. To celebrate, he drank a lot of strong ale at a tavern in the village of Leek. When it was time to go home, the drunk and tired farmer trusted his horse to guide him back. But as he rode along Dows Lane and over Moorbridge, 4 men had been following him. The men got ahead of him and jumped out. One grabbed the horse's reins, while the others pulled the farmer off his horse. One of them hit him on the head, and another started cutting at his neck with a sword. The robbers took the money he made from the market and hid in a barn until nightfall. When it was dark, they put the farmer's headless body back on his horse, placing his head under his arm. Since the body had stiffened, it stayed upright in the saddle. They hit the horse and it carried the body back home. Around midnight, the horse arrived at the farm, much to the horror of the farmer's wife. Or maybe she was glad at this point, what do I know? Since then, people say the headless ghost of the farmer rides across the open fields. Over the past 300 years, many people have claimed to see this headless horseman. One sighting comes from a farmer walking home after a few drinks. On the road, he saw a rider waiting by the road. Without looking at him, the farmer asked if he could get a ride home. When there was no answer, the farmer looked up and realized the rider had no head. The ghost grabbed him and started galloping down the road. The horse jumped over fences and hedges, dragging the poor man behind while the rider laughed darkly and went faster. The horseman let go when they neared the farmer's home, but the farmer was so badly hurt that he died a few days later. In another story, a different farmer and his wife were traveling down the road when another rider caught up to them. When they turned around to look at the rider, they realized that he was headless. The wife, however, couldn't see the ghost and didn't know what was going on. The headless horseman rode away, but the farmer was so shaken that he couldn't sleep for days. When he finally told his wife what he saw, strange things started happening. The next day, their horse dropped dead while plowing a field. A few days later, their dog got sick and died too. Luckily, the farmer himself wasn't harmed by the curse. An article in the Sentinel from October 1880 explained that the stories of the Headless Horseman made travelers so scared that even the smallest sound like squeaky doors frightened them. The article also mentioned how robbers used the legend to scare people by dressing up as the ghost to rob them. One of these criminals, named William Firm, lived near Butterton Moors and was eventually caught and hanged in Stafford. According to the same article, 7 priests were called to try and banish the spirit. The ghost supposedly told them that after his brutal death, he had become one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In 1920, a local journalist decided to search for the ghost himself. He gathered a group of Labor League members to help him track down the Headless Horseman. The journalist also interviewed a Mrs. Wood who lived on Black Lane. She recalled a chilling experience from her childhood when she and a friend were returning home from the Mayfair. Darkness had already fallen, and the moonlight was their only guide as they made their way across the moors. Suddenly, they heard the sound of galloping hoofs coming toward them. Overcome with fear, the two girls jumped over a wall and peered out. To their horror, they saw the Headless Horseman ride past them and disappear straight into a building across the road, vanishing into the brick wall. When the article was published, a local farmer supported Mrs. Wood's account, sharing his own eerie experience. He had seen a cart moving on its own at a farm at Dowse Lane, the very place where the headless farmer had been murdered by robbers in the early 1700s. In 1933, two groups of walkers decided to investigate whether the ghost stories were true. The first group saw nothing unusual, but the second group, which included a press photographer with a synchronized flashlight camera, faced an entirely different situation. News of the ghost hunt had spread, and locals from nearby villages swarmed the area, forcing the search to be called off. In 1798, General William Heath, who oversaw the Battle of Manhattan during the American Revolutionary War, reported that a cannonball had decapitated a Hessian soldier. Another shell killed the soldier's horse nearby. The grisly account of the Headless Hessian could have sparked the imagination of artists and writers like Washington Irving, who would later write The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. In 1870, doctors in the United Kingdom proposed a more scientific explanation for the sightings of headless riders. An insert in The Lancet, a prestigious London medical journal, recounted a bizarre incident during the Franco-Prussian War. On August 6, 1870, during the Battle of Worth in the Rhine Valley, soldiers witnessed a headless French horseman galloping across the battlefield. The writer explained that, after a sudden death, the body's muscles could temporarily remain in the position where they were before death and become rigid. This lifelike rigidity, if a soldier were decapitated while riding, could explain how his body stayed upright as the horse continued to gallop. This theory was supported by a letter sent to the Lancet editor in January 1871. Dr. Logan Russell shared accounts of similar cases of post-mortem rigidity during the American Civil War. He described how soldiers, nurses, and doctors had witnessed corpses maintaining the same posture they had just before death, offering a possible explanation for the seemingly supernatural sightings of the headless riders. One account describes a soldier who was shot in the head, yet his body was found leaning against a tree with the butt of his gun still pressed against his cheek and one eye closed, just as if he were aiming. This eerie image highlights how, in moments of sudden death, the body can sometimes remain locked in position, feeding into the myth of the Headless Horseman. While these rational explanations could shed light on how some ghost stories began, they don't fully account for the sightings of Headless Horsemen that occurred during times of peace or where the figure appeared as a mere ghost. Could there be any truth to these stories of Headless Horsemen from all around the world? Could these stories merely be the result of overactive imaginations fueled by the fear of darkness and the pervasive legends surrounding the horsemen? Or perhaps all of them share a common thing, that the spirit of the Headless Horseman haunts the empty, foggy roads of remote places, seeking vengeance and dumping unsuspected travelers who doubt his existence, stuck in an eternal living death, seeking for the very thing he can never get back. And what do you think? Could there be any truth to all of these stories? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me for today's tale. If you had fun or learned anything, be sure to drop a like or comment. Also, please subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one, or share this video with someone else. It's a very small button for you, and a gigantic leap for my channel. Until the next tale, farewell, and may the gods smile upon you.